She had survived nights that would have broken stronger people. But nothing had prepared her for the sight her dog dragged her toward that morning. Half buried in the snow, covered in 40 years of frozen silence, stood an old camper no one in the town even remembered. The moment she touched its icy door, the forest seemed to hold its breath, as if something inside had been waiting for her. Inside that camper lay journals written by a man who vanished in the winter of 1975, and maps leading to an unclaimed treasure hidden on federal land. Maps that someone else had died protecting. What her dog saw first, what made him freeze, stare, and growl, would change every part of her life that was still standing. If you stay with this story, you will understand how a homeless mother, a forgotten camper, a missing man, and a buried fortune became pieces of the same mystery. And why opening that frozen door was the most dangerous choice she had ever made. Because the past was not sleeping. It was waiting. She had survived nights that would have broken stronger people. Nights when the cold crept into her bones and loneliness pressed against her ribs like a weight she could not lift. But nothing in her life had prepared her for the sight her dog pulled her toward that morning. Shadow's leash strained in her hand as he darted ahead, nose low, tail rigid. His movements were sharp, urgent, almost frantic, as if something in the frozen woods had whispered directly to him. Mara called his name softly, her voice white in the cold air, but he did not slow. He only let out a trembling sound that was not quite a bark and not quite a whine. The forest around them felt different that day. Still, watching. The kind of stillness that did not comfort but warned. The kind of quiet that felt filled with someone else's breath. Shadow slipped through a break in the trees, and Mara followed, boots crunching through frosted needles. She had walked these woods for weeks since losing her rental and finding refuge wherever she could pitch a tarp. She thought she knew these paths. But today, the trail curved into a place she had never seen before, a hollow tucked between leaning pines and half-buried memories. And then she saw it. At first she thought it was a fallen structure. Some old hunting stand collapsed under the weight of decades. But as she stepped closer, the shape sharpened. Metal. Windows. A roof caved slightly inward. A camper. It was wedged between two trees like the forest had tried to swallow it whole. Snow clung to its sides in thick sheets, and frost glazed the broken edges of a shattered window. No tracks surrounded it. No signs of life touched it. It looked frozen in time, abandoned for so long that even the wind seemed to move around it rather than over it. Shadow stood locked in place before the camper door, his body trembling with something deeper than fear. His ears lowered, and his gaze fixed on the dark seam where the frozen door met the frame. It was as if he sensed a presence inside, or the echo of one. Mara hesitated. Curiosity was a luxury she rarely allowed herself. Survival came first. Food, warmth, safety. But something about the camper pulled at her, an invisible thread she could not ignore. It felt like stepping toward a story that had been waiting for her long before she ever walked into these woods. She touched the door. The metal burned with cold, so cold it stung through her glove. For a moment the forest went silent, unnaturally silent, as if even the trees were holding their breath to see what she would do. She pushed. The door resisted with a deep, groaning sound that seemed too alive for an object left to rust. Then it jerked open with a crack that echoed through the woods like a warning shot. Inside, the air felt frozen not just in temperature but in time. Dust clung to everything in delicate layers. Frost shimmered on the floor, on the counters, even on the old wool coat draped over a torn seat cushion. Nothing had been touched in decades. Shadow refused to enter. He stayed at the door, growling low, his eyes trained on the shadows inside. Mara stepped forward. Her breath misted around her as she examined the small space. There was a tin cup on the counter, filled long ago with snow that had melted and refrozen into a cloudy block of ice. A pair of cracked boots rested beside the door, Dust pooled inside them like pale sand. But the table stopped her cold. On it lay a journal. Thick, bound in cracked leather, its spine worn from years of use. Beside it were maps, 4 or 5 sheets, edges curled, ink faded but legible. They looked untouched, preserved by the unforgiving cold. She lifted the journal. It felt heavy in her hands, heavier than paper should feel, as if the stories inside carried weight even after all these years. She opened to the first page. December 3rd, 1975. Her fingers tightened around the journal. She had heard stories in town, half-forgotten murmurs about a man who disappeared in the winter of '75. But no one spoke with certainty. Just whispers. Just fragments. And here she stood, holding his words. If anyone finds this, it means the storm won. Her heart thudded once, hard. She turned the page. The entries painted a picture of a man isolated by snowstorms, stranded in these woods, searching for something he believed was worth risking his life for. He wrote in careful, uneasy strokes. Diagrams filled the margins. Sketches of mountain ridges, old logging trails, and creeks that had long since dried. His notes felt urgent, almost frantic. Then she saw it. One word that seemed to leap from the page. Treasure. Not the fantasy kind children dream about. He wrote it with precision, caution, and fear. He described something buried on unclaimed federal land. Something he believed was powerful enough that the government would hide it forever if they found it first. She lifted one of the maps. Red ink circled several areas. Notes bracketed the edges. One line had been underlined 3 times. Do not trust the man who offered help. He follows. He knows. A chill cut down her spine. Someone else had been part of this story. Someone dangerous. Someone who might still be alive. Someone who might have known the camper, never made it back to town. A crack echoed outside. Mara froze. Shadow barked sharply, lunging toward the tree line. Another sound followed, a branch snapping, the quick rustle of something moving too fast for the wind to create it. Mara crouched, heart pounding. Her instincts sharpened. She listened. The forest felt tense, tightened, as though every tree leaned closer to hear the next sound. Another snap. Closer. Deliberate. Shadow growled louder, the fur on his back rising. Mara closed the journal, slid it under her coat, and gathered the maps. Every part of her screamed to leave. The cold that had felt neutral now felt aware. A presence hung in the air, not visible but undeniable. She backed out of the camper. As she stepped onto the snow, the wind rose suddenly, swirling flakes around her legs. Behind her, the camper door creaked slowly, then began to shut on its own. Shadow whined urgently, tugging her away from the structure. Mara clutched the journal to her chest as the truth settled heavily inside her. This was no abandoned relic. This was the beginning of a story someone tried very hard to bury. And whatever had happened here in 1975, it was not finished with her. Not yet. Mara walked fast, almost stumbling as Shadow pulled her through the trees. The journal pressed under her coat felt like a living thing, radiating a strange weight against her chest. Every few steps she glanced back, half expecting a figure to emerge from between the pines. But there was only the quiet, stretching endlessly, thick enough to muffle even her own heartbeat. The forest did not feel passive anymore. It felt aware of her. Shadow kept his body close to the ground, muscles tight, ears scanning every direction. He stopped twice, sniffing the air with jerky movements, then growled softly as if warning her without words. Mara whispered reassurance, though her voice trembled. The deeper she moved back toward her makeshift camp, the more she wondered whether she had stepped into something she should have left buried. By the time she reached the small clearing where her tarp and backpack rested, her breath was shaking. Snow dusted her shoulders. Her palms burned where she had gripped Shadow's leash too tightly. She dropped to her knees beside the stump she used as a seat and pulled the journal out, placing it gently on her lap. Its leather cover looked older in the daylight, its edges frayed like the seams of an old wound. She brushed off the frost and stared at it for a long moment. She had nothing in her life that felt solid anymore. No home, no savings, no certainty of the next day. Yet somehow, holding this journal made her feel as though she had touched a thread that connected her to something bigger than survival, something that demanded understanding. Shadow lay beside her, but his eyes remained fixed on the woods, watching as if he expected the trees themselves to move. Mara opened the journal again. The next entry was dated 3 days after the first. The storms have blocked every escape path. The cold is worsening. My hands stiffen when I write, but I must keep documenting. I am too close to stop now. She traced the indent of the pen strokes, imagining the man sitting in that same camper with frost clinging to his breath. Alone, afraid, driven by something powerful enough to keep him writing while death circled him. She turned the page. Sketches covered it, drawings of rock formations, variations in soil color, symbols she did not recognize. Beneath them he had written, "The ground is unstable here. Something lies beneath, but uncovering it alone may be impossible." She studied the shapes. They looked like metal plates, cables, something industrial, hidden beneath land that had been untouched since the government had closed the area in the early 70s. She remembered overhearing rumors in town, a federal project abandoned without explanation, families relocated, access denied for years. She had thought it was just talk, but these maps suggested otherwise. Shadow suddenly lifted his head, ears pricking sharply. Mara froze. A sound drifted through the trees, distant but unmistakable. Footsteps, crisp and heavy. Not the hesitant scattering of animals. Someone was walking through the woods. She snapped the journal shut and pulled the tarp over her belongings. Her breathing grew shallow. Shadow stood in front of her, body protective, growl rumbling low. The footsteps grew louder, breaking branches that had not been touched in decades. Whoever it was moved with confidence, as if they knew where they were going. Mara crouched behind a fallen log, hand gripping Shadow's collar to keep him from lunging. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. She strained to see through the trees, but the figure remained hidden behind shifting pines. Then the sound stopped. The silence that followed felt colder than the wind, like someone had paused deliberately. Mara held her breath. A soft scrape echoed, metal against bark. A moment later, the footsteps resumed, but this time moving in another direction, away from her clearing. After several long minutes, the woods settled again. When she was sure the person was gone, Mara rose slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. She glanced down at Shadow. His tail remained rigid, his eyes wide. "Someone was here," she whispered, though she barely recognized her own voice. And that thought chilled her more than the frozen air around her. She packed her things quickly. If someone was searching these woods, staying here was dangerous. She needed to move. But she refused to abandon the journal or the maps. They were the key to understanding why the camper existed, and why someone else might be looking for it. With Shadow beside her, she headed toward the abandoned ranger station a mile south, the only place that offered temporary shelter. She moved fast, her feet slipping on icy patches. The trees seemed to shift with her, bending under gusts of wind that carried snow like whispers. By the time she spotted the weather-beaten building through the branches, exhaustion clung to her limbs. The ranger station had long since been condemned, its windows boarded, its roof sagging. But she had slept there twice in the past month, and it provided enough shelter from the cold. She slipped inside through the broken side door. Dust stirred around her as the air adjusted to her presence. Shadow sniffed the corners, alert but calmer. Mara sat near the old fireplace and opened the journal again, needing answers. The next entry felt heavier, more frantic. "I am being watched. Last night I heard footsteps outside the camper. I saw the shadow of a man at the treeline. He waited until my lamp dimmed. He knows what I found. He will not let me leave. Mara's breath hitched. She skimmed down the page. If I do not make it out, the treasure must remain hidden. It is not gold. It is not money. It is something far more dangerous in the wrong hands. I fear he understands that. She exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against her forehead. Dangerous. Something that could not fall into the wrong hands. Something buried intentionally. Her life had been built on trying to survive from one day to the next. Now she found herself holding the story of a man who believed he had stumbled onto something the world should never see. Shadow suddenly barked, a single sharp warning. A sound echoed outside. A door hinge. A step. Someone was near the ranger station. Mara's pulse surged. She snapped the journal shut and moved into the corner, pulling Shadow close. His body shook, not with fear, but with readiness. The footsteps stopped just outside the wall. The air thickened. Time stretched. Snowflakes drifted through the broken window like falling ashes. Mara held Shadow's collar so tightly her knuckles went white. Then, a slow, deliberate knock on the outer wall. 3 taps, evenly spaced. Not accidental. Shadow bared his teeth. Mara's breath froze inside her chest. Someone knew she was here, and they were not leaving. For a moment, Mara wondered if the cold itself had learned how to knock. The sound had been too measured, too intentional, echoing against the warped wooden siding of the abandoned ranger station with a certainty that tightened every muscle in her body. She pressed her back against the wall, one hand gripping Shadow's collar as he trembled with furious tension. His low growl vibrated against her palm. The silence that followed felt swollen, thick enough to suffocate. Whoever stood outside was not moving. They were waiting. A draft crept through the edges of the boarded windows, carrying the faintest whisper of footsteps shifting in the snow. Slow, controlled, like someone counting each step. Mara held her breath and lowered her body even further, instinct guiding her into the darkest corner of the station. Her mind raced. Had they followed her from the camper? Were they searching for the journal? Or had this person been moving through these woods long before she ever found that frozen door? Shadow nudged her hand, urging her attention to the left. She turned her head in time to see a dark shape drift past the broken window. Too tall to be an animal, too steady to be the wind. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. Another step outside. Then another. The person was circling the building. Mara swallowed hard. She needed an exit. The back of the ranger station offered none. The walls there had collapsed inward years ago, leaving splintered beams and tangled debris. The only open path was the narrow door she had slipped through earlier. But the thought of moving toward it while someone lurked just outside made her chest constrict. Shadow's growl deepened as the footsteps stopped again, this time near the side of the building, inches from where Mara hid behind a stack of broken shelves. The quiet stretched. Then the knock came again. 3 taps. Soft. Deliberate. Not threatening. Not kind. Simply aware. Shadow barked, a sharp sound that echoed through the station. Mara flinched at the noise, panic sparking in her chest. The footsteps shifted, scraping lightly against the wood, then retreated several steps before disappearing into the snow. Mara waited. 5 seconds. 10. 30. No return. No movement. Only the wind. "Shadow," she whispered, barely audible. "We need to leave." She gathered her backpack, slid the journal inside, and wrapped the maps in a plastic sleeve from her supplies. Her hands shook with adrenaline. She listened carefully once more before moving toward the back corner of the station where the wall had collapsed. Stepping over broken planks and shards of glass, she climbed through the opening and entered the deep snow outside. The air felt sharper now, carrying the weight of unseen eyes. Shadow stayed close, every muscle on alert. The sky had begun to darken with the early winter dusk, turning the treeline into a jagged silhouette. Mara kept low, every step deliberate, as she moved away from the ranger station and deeper into the forest's quieter stretch. For several minutes, the only sounds were her breathing and the soft crunch of snow beneath her boots. Slowly, tension eased from her shoulders. Maybe the stranger had left. Maybe they had only been passing by. Maybe. Shadow stopped abruptly. His ears pricked. His body stilled. His gaze fixed on something behind them. Mara froze and turned her head. In the distance, at the far edge of the clearing, a figure stood partially obscured by the trees. Tall. Motionless. Watching. Her breath faltered. The figure did not step forward, nor did it retreat. It simply stood there, blending into the shadows as if carved from the very forest itself. Mara's heartbeat surged. She could not make out a face, only the shape of a heavy coat, wide shoulders, and something glinting at the person's side. Metal? A tool? A weapon? She could not tell. Shadow growled again, low and warning. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if studying them. That was enough. Mara turned and started walking faster, almost running, refusing to look back even when branches snapped behind her. She pushed through the trees until her legs burned and her lungs ached. She did not stop until the figure was gone from sight. By the time night fully settled, she had reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow creek. She had slept here once before. The rocks provided enough shelter from the wind, and the creek, though frozen, offered a faint boundary that made her feel safer. She built a small fire in a hollow between stones, shielding the flames from open view. The warmth spread through her hands, grounding her. She unzipped her backpack and pulled out the journal again. She needed to understand what she was caught in. Shadow curled beside her, but his eyes remained open, scanning the dark. Mara opened to the next entry. He followed me again today. He does not hide. He wants me to know he is there. He wants me to fear him before he acts. I hear him at night. He walks around the camper, circling as if choosing the right moment. Her stomach tightened. She turned the page. If he gets the maps, he will uncover what I found. I fear he will use it. I fear the consequences. I must. Bury everything before the storm worsens. If the ground takes me too, then let it be. Better that I vanish than let him succeed. Mara set the journal down, staring into the fire. The man from 1975 had been hunted, just like she felt hunted now. She reached for one of the maps, studying the red marks. Her gaze lingered on a circle near a canyon symbol. A note had been scribbled beneath it. Final sight. Bury everything here before he arrives. She traced the line with her thumb. What were you hiding? She whispered. She felt the answer pulse through the frozen air, not in words, but in the weight of the woods around her. Something dangerous lay buried out there. Something powerful. Something worth killing for. Shadow lifted his head suddenly. His ears twitched. A crack echoed in the distance. Then another. Footsteps approaching across the snow. Mara extinguished the fire instantly, pressing Shadow close to the ground. The footsteps grew louder. Steady. Unhurried. Familiar. The same rhythm she had heard earlier. Her breath trembled. Someone had found her again. Mara lay on her stomach beside the cold stones where the fire had died, cheek against the frozen ground. The night pressed close around the rocks, a solid wall of dark and silence. Shadow leaned against her side, tense, eyes fixed ahead. Footsteps crunched through the snow. Slow. Heavy. Certain. This was the same rhythm she had heard circling the ranger station, the same presence that had watched from the treeline. Whoever it was had followed her all the way here. The steps stopped just beyond the ring of stones. Come out, a man's voice called. It was low, steady, and too calm. Your dog has been giving you away all day. Shadow growled. The sound remained low in his throat, but Mara felt it travel through her ribs. She stayed still, listening as the man shifted his weight again. "I am not a ranger," he said. "I am not the police. I am someone who has been looking for that camper since 1975. I saw your tracks. You went inside. You took the maps and the journal. Those do not belong to you." He spoke with the certainty of someone who expected agreement. "You will hand them over," he continued, "and then you will walk away from these woods and forget there was ever anything here to find." Mara's fingers tightened in Shadow's fur. He talked like the world owed him obedience. She thought of all the times doors had closed in her face, of the shelter staff apologizing as they let her daughter in and left Mara outside in the wind. No one had ever spoken to her with the assumption that she had something valuable. Slowly, she rose from the ground. Snow whispered under her boots as she stepped between the rocks and faced him. He stood a few yards away, wrapped in a worn winter coat and scarf, cap pulled low. His hair was gray at the edges, his jaw narrow, his eyes bright with a kind of restless hunger. A short metal bar hung from his belt. His hands were empty for now. "It has taken years," he said, studying her. "I knew that camper did not vanish. The storm buried it. The forest hid it. But something in these woods draws people who have nothing to lose. I knew eventually someone would find it again." "You knew him," Mara said. He gave a small, sharp nod. "He was my partner," the man answered. "A geologist. He worked on the federal project out here. He found something under this land that should never have been left behind. The government shut everything down, sealed the reports, and walked away. He tried to leave with proof. I tried to stop him. The storm did the rest." His gaze dropped briefly to her coat, to the place where the journal lay against her chest. "Now you have what he stole," he said. "Those maps point to energy the world will pay any price to control. With them, I can show companies where to dig. Nations will compete. Wealth will pour in. And you, if you are wise, will accept the gift I am offering and go back to your life." "And what happens to the people living above that land?" Mara asked. "To the forest, to the water. They will adapt," he said. "Progress always demands something. You, of all people, know that ideals do not fill plates. You sleep outside. Your child sleeps in a shelter. Do not pretend you would not take a share if I offered one." The words struck clean and hard. He was right about the facts. Mara was broke. She had no address to write on forms. Every morning, she carried the shame of not being able to bring her daughter into her arms at night. When she had first seen the word treasure, a part of her had reached for it like a drowning person reached for light. But she had read his partner's journal. She had felt the fear in those pages, the warning that the wrong hands would use what lay under the canyon without caring who it hurt. She looked at the man in front of her and saw the shape of that warning. "No," she said. A faint line appeared between his brows. "Say that again," he replied. "I will not give you the maps," she said. "Or the journal." The patience drained from his expression. Something colder slid into its place. "You do not have that choice," he said. "You have something I need. That means I decide how this ends." He stepped forward. Shadow lunged, barking, forcing him to stop. His hand went to the metal bar at his belt. He did not lift it yet, but the threat was clear. "The ground at that canyon is unstable," he said. "If I go in blind, there may be a collapse. Your friend wrote that 12 times. Give me the maps, and no one else will have to get hurt." "If the ground is that fragile," Mara said quietly, "then maybe it should not be touched at all." His eyes narrowed. He moved. The man surged toward her, one hand grabbing for her coat, the other clawing at her side. Shadow slammed into his legs. His boots hit a sheet of hidden ice near the edge of the rocks above the frozen creek. He slipped. Instinctively, he grabbed the nearest thing to brace himself. His fist closed around the strap of Mara's backpack. The weight yanked her toward the drop. For one suspended second, They hung together above the black line of the ravine. Shadows scrabbled desperately, claws tearing tracks in the snow. Mara saw her daughter's face in her mind, lit by the weak yellow lights of the shelter hallway. She wrenched her arms out of the backpack straps. The pack slid off her shoulders. Man and canvas dropped in the same instant, swallowed by the steep white slope below. There was the harsh scrape of sliding rock, a dull impact, then a long, echoing quiet. Mara fell backward and lay on the snow, staring up at the sky until the spinning stopped. Shadow climbed onto her chest, whining until she lifted a shaking hand and stroked his head. When her breath steadied, she crawled to the edge and looked down. The ravine was steep and jagged. The man lay crumpled near the base, half hidden in shadow. Her backpack hung on a broken branch above him, torn and swaying. There was no safe path into that darkness. The maps were gone. She pressed her palm against her chest. The journal was still there. For a long minute she stayed kneeling at the lip of the ravine, the cold biting through her jeans, the trees standing silent above her. She had entered the woods with nothing but a dog and a tired body. Now she carried a choice she had already made and could not take back. At last she stood. She turned away from the canyon and began to walk. The forest felt looser, as if some long-held breath had finally been released. Behind her, the buried secret remained where it had been locked decades ago, sealed again by distance and rock and the stubbornness of the land. Ahead, in the far distance, a faint orange glow marked the town. Streetlights. Windows. The shelter where her daughter slept. Mara drew her coat tighter around the journal and headed toward that light. She was still a homeless mother with no clear plan and no promise of easy days. There was no gold waiting, no sudden fortune, no simple rescue. But she had refused to trade strangers' lives and the future of the land for her own comfort. In time, she would decide what to do with the journal. Perhaps she would place its pages in careful hands. Perhaps she would tell the story anonymously and let others argue over what should happen next. For now, it was enough that the man who chased power had not won. Shadow trotted at her side, steps light, ears calm. The sky ahead began to pale at the edges, the first hint of morning spreading over the trees. Mara walked toward it, carrying no treasure of metal or stone, but something rarer and far more fragile. A reason to begin again.